As the day before turned into the days after, we knew that we would start to get first-hand accounts from those that had been there in the trenches as it all started to crumble around them. And oh boy, they are starting to talk. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It's LtBuzzLitebeer, and we've got new information coming from former FNTASTIC employees that goes to the heart of the genius behind the day before. And I say that term loosely because, well, you're about to find out. Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. Likes, comments, shares are greatly appreciated. And here we go with the latest from the day before. Coming to us from a recent article and corresponding video from iXBT.Games, these editors were able to speak for hours, direct via Discord with former FNTASTIC employees, which at this point feels like it should be half of the Eastern Hemisphere, knowing what we know about how fast the brothers FNTASTIC seem to run through staff. Anyways, we're going to start off with their 2021 middling release, Propnight. And it turns out that as the inevitable crunch hit the studio leading up to the release of that game, the brothers locked the developers in the office for weeks at a time, proclaiming, "This is how games should be made." Team members could not go home, they had no access to showers, and didn't always have time to even eat. And so when Propnight did eventually release to somewhat positive reviews, the brothers' egos exploded overnight. Described by the developers that were there to witness it, the FNTASTIC brothers considered themselves almost like Hideo Kojima, going so far as to force the dev team to completely rework the visual style of Propnight from scratch because they had just finished playing Resident Evil and they wanted the same aesthetics of that game placed into their game. Now, this new version of Propnight was flamed as players that had originally enjoyed the game started abandoning it, prompting the brothers to now task the staff with reverting everything to as it was before. But the damage was done. Propnight, completely devoid of updates and improvements for 6 months, was abandoned by the player base, and so begins this knee-jerk cycle of development hell administered by the brothers FNTASTIC. So, remember back to this wacky and weird devlog, Life at FNTASTIC, where it was initially hyped up as another reveal for the day before, almost like an exclusive look behind the scenes for the work being done on the game, but it turned into anything but that, as it was one giant infomercial for a new workplace app, Continent. Well, according to the developers, Continent was first created for use within the studio, but they soon recognized it had potential if released to the mass market, posturing itself as a Russian equivalent of Zoom, MS Teams, or even Google Meetup. Various Russian businesses were apparently interested in using this Continent app, and during the pandemic and remote work environment, this would have done extremely well with employers throughout the country. But it was 2022, and sanctions had fallen on the country, and again, the brothers FNTASTIC interjected themselves into this situation, deciding to take Continent to the world market, where it was served a swift death, because there was simply more and better options for a workplace app already in place, and as a result, Continent, a finished product and possibly one of FNTASTIC's best chances of success, was simply closed. But, you know, the brothers weren't at all despondent because long before the failure of Continent, they had signed a contract with publisher Mytona to begin creating a AAA game, plunging FNTASTIC into hell. What comes next is simply mind-boggling, as the brothers seem to crash from one concept to the next, minute by minute, and it's a wonder that anything at all was ever released by FNTASTIC. The brothers FNTASTIC had superb, grand visions for the day before, as the original size of this map was slated to be 4 times larger than the one we saw at release. It had to be a huge location where there was no transitions or teleportations between points of interest. The brothers wanted crowds of zombies, to be able to ride around in cool cars and live in multi-story America. You know, it feels like these two grew up watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, you know, the grandest Hollywood adventures, and that's what they seem to want always in their game. On a personal note, I've always wondered myself about NVIDIA and how they ever got pulled into this disaster, and the developers actually had some juicy details concerning this one as well. You see, the video for NVIDIA, which showed off things like ray tracing, which never made it into the final product, was a completely separate build of the game created for recording that trailer. It has nothing in common with the final product. Yeah, you don't say. And it was actually created to fool the suits at Team Green because NVIDIA had begun to doubt the existence of the project. So, the brothers ordered the staff to make some cool graphics in order to convince NVIDIA and gain their support. And another facet we don't seem to hear anything about is not only how this scam was brought to market in an attempt to fool gamers, but also how it was able to completely ensnare the likes of IGN and NVIDIA, who enabled and were complicit in this gaming disaster. Back to this article, and according to the devs, over 500 gigs of source code were created for the day before, the vast majority of which were never used. The version of the game that was released on Steam on December the 7th turns out to be 1/10 the content that was originally intended. Even the game itself was made and remade, according to these devs, from scratch 3 or 4 times, depending on the mood of the brothers. Moreover, and this next statement is just mind-blowing, the day before was developed for years as a single-player project until one day the brothers made the announcement that we're now making an MMO. The jump mechanics, which by the way in-game were awful, were apparently redone 50 times. The tablet was actually added late in development because the brothers had played s.t.a.l.k.e.r and they saw the PDA, and the interface was apparently redrawn from scratch 5 times. And at first it was accepted, but then demanded to be redone again by the brothers because they had just finished playing GTA. 2 months before the game's release, the art department was told to repaint the entire city to look like Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Lambos, Bugattis, Louis bags, Rolex watch stores, all of these were present in the game with a purpose, as the game had to ooze excess and over-the-top wealth, which would somehow translate to players thinking the game was made by a bunch of cool guys led by brilliant leaders. Even the clear excess of American flags were staged so that it would connect with the US player base. If inventory items looked too cheap, the devs were told to make them look expensive. Changes that would normally require 2 to 3 days worth of work were required to be completed overnight, many times then being completely removed when the brothers changed their minds the next morning. This developer states people burned out like matches. Arguing with the brothers FNTASTIC turns out was futile, as any employee that attempted to do so was immediately fired. Or worse yet, they were made department head, given an impossible task, and then fired a week later when they had invariably fallen behind on that impossible task. And hearing all of these accounts of abuse and just horrid working conditions, you're probably asking why these developers simply didn't stand up and walk out. I mean, I know I am. And here's where we get the answers. You see, the brothers FNTASTIC recruited employees from rural provinces and small regional cities. You promise a good salary compared to what they can make back home, a AAA project in your portfolio, and then you turn a person's life to hell. They preyed on these workers. They manipulated them, always pushing. The end justifies the means. Work hard and you will be rewarded. Apparently, developers worked in this studio 18 hours a day. And by the way, it would have been great if they could have told us where that studio was, because it clearly wasn't where they registered it at. And it turns out weekends were work days. There were 0 days off, and still the devs came back. They had nowhere to go. Morale plummeted as the brothers brutalized and fired the staff, telling fired employees they could return in 3 months, of which many did. Testing the actual day before game began in early 2023 and all done by a team of 5 people. Now, these testers had to spend dozens of hours walking the map, looking for problem areas, which were then deleted as there was no time to optimize the game as it got closer to release. This is why the city is so empty, according to this developer, and that also means they must have encountered a crap ton of issues because the city is just lifeless and barren. Zombie hordes had to be abandoned because the servers could not handle the load. And what about those famous FNTASTIC Volunteers? Well, It turns out they worked on Propnight and other studio projects. The brothers FNTASTIC were deathly afraid of leaks. Of it being discovered, there was essentially no game there, and all the trailers were just vaporware, and so any volunteers that insisted on working on the day before were immediately let go. Only a small circle of devs were allowed to touch the day before. No mass testing was conducted, no closed testing, you don't say. I mean, they had no idea what would happen when the game went live. Could the servers handle the load? Which it turns out they could not. And this is why the servers went crazy at launch and the zombies wouldn't load in. Enter Mytona, the game's publisher, who apparently went to see their AAA product finally in November 2023 and were horrified. Okay, I still don't know how this happened like this. Mytona was funding the entire project and they never checked on the progress of the day before prior to November. They just blindly trusted a couple of unproven studio heads with potentially millions of dollars in funding? Anyways, Mytona, based on the horrific state of the day before, apparently sent specialists to the studio to try to help. And after seeing the game in the state that it was, these specialists reported back to Mytona that there was no saving the game. It should just be released as is because an additional year of development would not give any guarantees it would be enough to save this game. Now on to the finale for this scam. Launch day, December 7th, and it turns out the FNTASTIC brothers missed the entire launch of their very first AAA game and forced the developers to make all the decisions themselves. These devs cleaned the servers, they wrote the hotfixes, although they were not allowed to release the fixes for a long time because apparently Dr. Disrespect was streaming the game. Over the weekend after launch, the devs compiled a list of problems and came to the conclusion that 80% of them could be fixed within a week. They even made a hotfix to return the zombies to the map. Then they came into work the following Monday, dreaming of developer glory, and were met with the now infamous internal document showing sales and refunds, and oh, by the way, the studio is closing. After the release of the day before, according to one of these devs, Mytona received all rights to the game, and the company voted to close the project and bury that shame forever. I worked on the day before and survived, became a resume-worthy meme, showing that a person had gone through hell and was prepared for anything. And for those former devs, they are now starting to receive offers to work on a new mobile game allegedly being headed by the brothers FNTASTIC. In the end, you've got to feel bad for anyone that got sucked into this scheme, especially those that were just looking to make a name for themselves and get a foot in with the game development scene. I don't know. What do you think of all this? The brothers, how much fumbling around and redos this sham scam game went through, and what of the news that they may be making a comeback this time in the mobile market? Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. Likes, comments, shares are of course greatly appreciated. All my socials can be found in the video description. Shout out to the nearly 187,000 of you that have stuck with me and hit subscribe. And a special thanks goes out to my Patreon supporters. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer signing off.
System of failure.